Hello everybody, it's been great today. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks for inviting me, Kyung Young. My name's Sam Hudson-Miles and I'm a senior lecturer and course leader of the BA Honours Fashion Design Suite at the University of Huddersfield. My background as a fashion design practitioner and educator has led to a PhD research project that explores theories of fashion, consumption and use value as a form of creative reuse as a way to address sustainability in post-growth fashion. The reason why my research focuses on consuming clothing rather than designing it came from a bit of a light bulb moment a couple of years ago at Graduate Fashion Week and just sitting watching runway after runway and kind of wondering, why are we doing this? You know, that there is just in that event alone, never mind globally, there is so much overproduction of clothing. And so within my role as an educator of design practice, I'm really moving towards, and with my team on board as well, bringing about a more purposeful rationale for fashion design thinking through our students from year one, really. So it's really important that sustainability isn't just an add-on, a bolt-on, it becomes integral to the core ethos of what we're trying to teach. And that's from a sort of pedagogical point of view. So my interests lie in shifting the culture of fashion consumption as a way to slow down fashion production. Because ultimately I believe that the consumer drives production, not the other way around. And if we can slow it down from the point of consumption, then we can slow down the production cycle, fast fashion, as we like to call it. So my take on upcycling in the context of this event is through creative active consumption and the relationship of this to post-growth fashion and the personal narratives that we build around our clothing. The soul shopping, the phrase soul shopping is something that I really use. It's a phrase for active consumption and use value, and it encompasses sourcing, styling, archiving, storytelling, communities of clothing, place, histories, activism, socio-economic factors, all in the context of upcycling, autoethnography, and what Kate Fletcher terms as post-growth fashion. So that's just an introduction, really, of really what this presentation is about. So upcycling is an existing strategy applicable to fashion production, with discarded materials used to design and create higher value products, keeping them in productive use for longer. Upcycling, therefore, transforms the historically dominant but increasingly exhausted linear producer-consumer waste model of the fashion ecosystem into something more circular. The recent rise in fashion upcycling transcends stereotypical perceptions of DIY needlecraft or thrift. Now, mainstream fashion retailers offer incentives to customers for returning their unwanted clothes to store or in return for a gift card, with some garments returning to the production cycle for reinstatement in store and remarketisation as exclusive upcycled fashion. Although this contributes to the upcycling movement, it misses the core ethos that the upcycling of fashion should not only contribute to sustainable shopping as a whole, but also serve as art pieces, cultural commentary, and a sense of connection. Kate Fletcher's Craft of Use post-growth fashion celebrates the tending and wearing of garments as much as their creation, revealing the expression of fashion in a world not dependent on continuous consumption, where garments, while sold as a product, are lived as a process. Fletcher frames this as usership, a relational lifestyle driven by the joy and love of fashion, not market and government-led priorities. The aim herein is to disrupt the fast fashion system by reducing mindless fashion consumption, not from the point of design and production, but from that of the consumer, not as the end point of the supply chain, but as the driver of the chain, whereby demand dictates supply through the practice of soul shopping. Soul shopping facilitates active consumption, defies the fast fashion model, and leverages the wider fashion revolution to contribute to an emergent anti-capitalist fashion ecosystem. Soul shopping is defined academically, synthesizing theories of post-growth fashion and emotionally durable design through situated autoethnographic and object-based research techniques as a replicable research methodology for upcycling, which others can employ without prerequisite technical skills in fashion making or expertise in fashion styling. Integral to soul shopping, purchasing second-hand items from local charity shops forwards an ethics which supports charitable causes, prevents clothing waste by revitalising unwanted garments, benefits local economies, and reduces the carbon footprint whilst connecting the consumer with their local community in a shared ethos. Soul shopping is user-centred and valorises individuality and style as bricolage, whilst challenging the systematic overproduction of clothing within an already asphyxiated fashion ecosystem. Soul shopping is not one-dimensional. It is an engaged practice of fashion consumption that is relational and has the potential to build communities of practice where stories are told, experiences shared, even clothing shared, and is testament to the accrued socio-temporal meaning of clothes. As fashion revolutions say, loved clothes last. Soul shopping reconnects the consumer with their clothing through an experiential lived lens, embedding less transient, enduring values within products that may be sustained through the slow passing of time. Soul shopping connects with the haptic, the sensory, the memory, the emotional connection that is intrinsic to this practice becomes a labour of love as we sift for the gold from the dross that is hidden among the innumerable rails of unwanted clothing. Soul shopping connects us indelibly to moments in time, specific shops, specific towns, specific people, specific sensory experiences all contribute to the soul of the piece, the joy of the find, and the use value of the purchase. So I've been shopping in charity shops since the mid-80s, since I was about 14. It's a way of life for me. I was listening to Jane Grey earlier. Jane Grey, and it really resonated what Jane was saying about, you know, being sort of frugal was a way of life. It's same for me in every way of life, but certainly in sort of shopping for clothing, which then led me to my education in fashion and so on. But now, at the stage of my, I guess, professional life I am now, it feels really purposeful and connected for me to translate this sort of habitus into a PhD research project. But I just want to show you an example here in figure 1. So the soul shopping really begins with an archive of clothing that I've collected over a sort of a 3-decade period. And this is just one outfit from this archive of clothing. So the clothing has been purchased in the same Yorkshire town over 3 decades. And I wanted to focus on a specific town in Yorkshire because I'm very interested in, I suppose, what we term as human geography. And I'm really interested in socio-economic factors as well, especially of working class areas, or what are termed as working class areas. So this collection's been used as a mechanism for further investigating craft of use through an autobiographical account of the provenance, material culture, and the use value of each piece. The reading of each piece embodies the biography of objects, experiential notions of the haptic, human geography through communities of clothing, and political decision-making, an anti-capitalist approach to clothing consumption that leverages the wider fashion revolution and contributes to this emergent fashion ecosystem. So the dress, which is really the hero piece of this collection, is from the 1970s and was purchased in Oxfam in 2007 for £7.99. It's made from polyester in England for D.L. Barron, a brand that has had a renaissance through resale platforms such as Etsy. This dress has become personified as the Gucci girl dress, an affectionate name given by someone who misidentified it as a luxury designer piece. This not only suggests that highbrow style can be accessed by those who cannot afford the high-end designer label's price tag, but that soul shopping is a form of resistance against the dominance of multinational corporations, big brands, and fast fashion. So just to go through the other pieces within this photograph, the knee boots are black patent all leather made in Italy, £8.99 from Age UK, purchased recently. The black vintage leather studded bag is made in England. I purchased it for £4.50 from Scope in 1998. The black vintage 100% wool fedora, also made in England, was £2.75 from the British Heart Foundation, purchased in 2010. The silver tone snake and Tibetan style bangles were £1 each from Mencap, purchased recently. The gold tone and ochre enamel orchid earrings, which you probably can't see in this image, were £1 from Shelter, purchased in 2005. And the sterling silver link bracelet was 50p from Muslim Aid in Dewsbury. It also has I upcycled this actually. It has a marquisite and turquoise pendant attached to it, which was 50p from Cancer Research, purchased 1997. And then I also have you probably can't see it, but a solid jade bangle, which was a real treasure for me. It cost me 50p, solid jade from Sue Ryder in 2014. Now, so I think really, although this is about consumption, having this archive of clothing also has a pedagogical context in terms of design thinking. So using this archive to show students how things were made, sizing, materials, silhouettes, and also kind of reawakening otherwise what would be forgotten clothing into new context. So there's all sorts of avenues that this research I'm really excited about can go down in the practical sense as well as the theoretical. I also have an Instagram channel, the Rerunway, hang on, here we go. This is quite new. I started it at the beginning of lockdown. My son is co-producer. I'm really into the relational, so I work with my family quite a lot on everything that I do. I have a big direct family, and we're all interested in the same thing. So he's worked with me on this channel. So it's in its early days, but you know, please have a look at it. I'm really interested in sharing stories. So if you've got any stories to share about any pieces that you own, it's also Secondhand September as we speak. So again, maybe start thinking about clothing and sharing stories, and sharing the Instagram page would be great. And that's it, thank you. And I don't think the bell rang, did it?
I was about to ring it, but you just managed just in time. Yeah. So I was just listening. I said, okay, I should just let it go. So we have 1 minute for just a quick reflection. If anybody has got any comment. Okay, just from my side, there are two things that touched me. One, what you started with, how I would see it like a purposeful rationale for shopping or consuming products. And I can feel that you have created such a vast library of goods around you that have a deep meaning. Like some of the things are very old and they have a story behind, and you know the story. And it just makes that emotional connection with your articles and your clothing and jewelry, etc. And also how another point was that how your family members are also in that. So kind of supporting them. For example, you have been supported by your family members to make this Instagram channel, which I think is a fascinating idea. So yeah, yes, Erica says that we will visit your account, Instagram account. And then Noorin said, thanks, Sam. Great to hear how you want to bring this work into fashion education. Amazing, yeah.
Thank
you.
Somebody
has just, Donna has just followed you on Instagram.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I mean, I want the page to be really interactive. So, you know, it's as much people tagging me in and telling me stories. And I tried to get my students to do this. And we're going to do something in induction week where we're going to ask students to bring clothing in that has a story, and to talk about, because, you know, with that, I know this is like a really short abstract that I presented here. There's a lot more detail to talk about. But, you know, by getting the Generation Z, I guess, student really understanding clothing and why they're making choices about what they're wearing and what it means to them and how it resonates, then to translate that thinking into design thinking. That's the plan. That we connect them with their practice as well as their wearing of clothing as fashion.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jan. I hope you will succeed in that, and you are already. So
it's early days, so early days.
So next we have Noorin, who is, so if you could, Sam, you have to stop sharing so that Noorin could share her. Yeah, perfect.
Hello. I hope you don't mind. I will switch my camera on after my presentation because my Wi-Fi has been a little bit ropey this morning, and I want to make sure that I can do this first. That's all right.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Great, thank you. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Noorin Khamisani, and I'm just going to start off by introducing myself a little bit. So I've had my own sustainable fashion label, Outsider, for about 11 years now. And I taught part-time alongside my professional practice for many years. And then last year, I started a full-time role as a fashion design lecturer at DIDI. So that's the Dubai Institute for Design and Innovation. Before I start my presentation, I actually just wanted to acknowledge that there are some similarities between my paper and the first paper we heard today, which was Material Inventories for Responsive Design in Fashion Practice. And I just want to say I was so pleased to see that project and the fact that it was being done at such a large scale at such well-established universities. That was really inspiring for me. I myself am working at a very new university here in Dubai, so it's presented a really great opportunity to be at the beginning of developing a curriculum, getting to develop, really, I think, quite experimental fashion pedagogy, because we don't have this kind of history, we are starting from scratch here. And I think one of the things I should also highlight, and this is more, I'm thinking of it based on what's been shared so far today. And we've talked a lot, I think, or there's been lots of talk about different contexts for upcycling in different countries and different regions, how it's interpreted differently. And I haven't really addressed that actually in my presentation, but I just wanted to say that I think that's also something to highlight, that here in the UAE, upcycling is still relatively a new concept in terms of initiatives on a local level. And if we compare it to a Western context, it's very different. Okay, so let's get started. So my paper's entitled Exploring Upcycling as a Design Process Through Fashion Education. And there's 3 parts to my presentation. Firstly, why we need upcycling in fashion education. Secondly, how I mapped upcycling as a design process and then ran the project. And thirdly, the results, and I'm going to show you some examples of student work. So firstly, we know the fashion industry has a problem with overproduction as well as discarded garments. So both pre and post-consumer waste are issues within the fashion industry. This is due to many factors, but perhaps some of the ones that we're most familiar with are fast-moving trends, product obsolescence, as well as issues with planning. And there have been really terrible stories of some brands going so far as to burn stock to alleviate the burden of having to store it or deal with it at all. The other consideration I think is really important is the negative impact of discarded secondhand garments being sent to developing countries. This has become an industry in itself, but it can actually undermine local textile and garment industries and livelihoods. And it's not all bad news. There are some brands that have begun to address some of these challenges. And one of the ones that I wanted to highlight was Eileen Fisher's Tiny Factory. So this was part of a vision of the founder who started to think about the fact that fashion brands should take responsibility for the full life cycle of their products. And so I think it was actually in 2009 that they began asking their customers to return garments that they were no longer using or no longer needed. And so this has become, the Tiny Factory has now become a part of Eileen Fisher's initiative to go towards working as a circular fashion business. And so they do this through mending, dyeing, remaking items. And in an interview, when they were asked, you know, how do they do this, and, you know, how have they decided the best way to deal with discarded garments is, what they said is that they were learning as they go along. And I think this really highlights the fact that research is needed in this area. And, you know, if we come back to this, you know, this issue of overproduction and discarded garments within the fashion industry, we start to really see that there's an opportunity for fashion education to play a role. So how can fashion education help the fashion industry move towards a more sustainable and circular model? So this was really the beginning of my thinking for the syllabus that I was writing at DIDI. So imagining this issue, I mean, if we imagine perhaps in the future that we can't make new raw materials and we have to use all this waste that's created, so to work with existing garments, it's a different kind of mindset, it's a different way of working. And so we could imagine that this is really needed in the skill set of the fashion designer of the future. And then building on Ruby Howitt's work, this also becomes a really interesting tool for an active critique of the fashion system. So this brings me to the second part of my presentation. And this is where I mapped a design process for upcycling. Now, this is based on some previous work I've done within my own practice, where I was trying to understand how I was designing for longevity, and I did this kind of mapping exercise. So I used that same way of thinking for upcycling within fashion. This became really useful because I realized that what I had to do was to highlight to the students that this was a different way of working, because in a conventional fashion design process, we start with inspiration and then we start sourcing our fabrics by the meter. But our starting point for upcycling is different. First of all, we're identifying a discarded garment. So I'm going to give you a closer look at this diagram. So we start off by identifying a discarded garment. And then we went through a deconstruction process, ideally unpicking along seam lines. And it's actually through that deconstruction that I encourage the students to analyze the shapes they were finding, analyze the construction, think about the materials and notions, and alongside that, gather their inspiration. So this inspiration process is actually linked to the deconstruction process rather than coming before. And then we started to think about design intentions. So here it's all about reinventing, creating new items. So I encourage the students to try to completely transform what they had. So if they started off with a jacket, they shouldn't end up with a jacket. And we should also be thinking about increasing the value, thinking about timelessness and versatility. And then we get back into what is quite a conventional fashion design process. So then we can come up with our preliminary ideas for the range, design refinement, and then move into a kind of final design implementation. So what was really interesting about this whole process of working with the students in this way is that this kind of deconstruction process proved itself to be very valuable, especially with students very early in their studies. So I've done these kind of upcycling workshops at several universities in the UK previously. But here in Dubai, I was working with second year students, but I should highlight that although they are second year design students, they're actually first years in fashion. And so actually this whole upcycling design process, understanding the shapes they were finding through deconstruction, really helped them to understand pattern cutting and construction in reverse. The other thing that I think was really valuable is that it broke them out of a kind of conventional way of thinking about fashion. And again, it's not just in Dubai, I've seen this with fashion students in many regions. I think often students, especially early in their careers, they're very kind of influenced by shows like, you know, Project Runway and kind of really strong trends that are happening in the fashion industry. And I think by starting this upcycling process with really focusing on a discarded garment, it was a way to actually get the students to take inspiration from waste, which then enabled them to think beyond existing systems and existing trends, which for me as an educator is what's most interesting actually. When they thought beyond these existing trends, it really fueled engaging innovation in the finished designs. So this brings me to the third part. I'm going to show you some examples of student work. I think this student is actually watching today. So hello, Pavan, thank you for joining us. So this is Pavan's project, and she started off with a tailored men's jacket, which, you know, she completely transformed. And just to sort of clarify that, you know, one of the other aspects of the project, because I was encouraging the students to completely reinvent through this upcycling, we did a lot of development work around fabric manipulation techniques, print design, as well as experiments with biomaterials. So within this student outcome, you can see that we've gone from a jacket to a trouser and a top, lots of fabric manipulation, other found materials were integrated, her own print design here. And we were gone from something that was a men's jacket to something that feels a bit like streetwear. This is another example of a student's work that I really enjoyed because there was such a transformation. So we started off with a denim jacket. Again, this was deconstructed, and then this is just one part of that denim jacket that's then been turned into this kind of decorative sleeve. And so again, lots of fabric manipulation, and also a biomaterial has been integrated here. So it's also thinking about all the different techniques that we could actually be using within upcycling. And this really kind of surprised me, actually, how far we could go. And another example of that is here. Another student that actually took her deconstructed pieces and then put them in through a laser cutter. And so then she ended up creating whole new fabrics through this laser cutting. And she took some elements of these laser cut pieces and took them into another project, and essentially used the waste from that within this project. So again, the way that the joined up thinking was happening across the projects was really exciting to me. So overall, students really valued the upcycling design process. This is based on, you know, the course feedback that we received. And what was really interesting is that through offering an alternative to the conventional process of starting with new materials, we got to break out of existing trends. So in summary, we know we have a problem with overproduction in the fashion industry. And therefore, upcycling is one of the ways that we can train designers to be equipped to deal with this. And it's also a really great opportunity for fashion education to be part of a better fashion industry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Noorin, for a wonderful presentation. And yeah, it's a totally different way of thinking when you design clothes. And I hope to see, like, you know, not in the traditional way how markets work, but kind of more upscaled level of consumption, you know, through these kind of designs and products in the market. So yeah, anybody with questions, comments? So Corey says, very inspiring. That was so exciting. Jane says, Anna says that, thank you so much for your presentation. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Okay, well, then we were running 2 minutes late. I think Nouri has then really gifted us 2 minutes so that we don't run over to the, to the coffee break later. So I would like to welcome the third presentation, which is Commoning Situated Knowledge by Elaine, Susan, Lara, and Jennifer. Yeah, so please.
Hi, thank you, Jagdeep. Hi, everybody. My name's Elaine Igoe, and I'm going to be presenting today alongside my colleagues, Susan Noble and Lara Torres. We're going to be outlining an ongoing collaborative research project that we've been doing using waste uniform. And again, just as Noorin was saying, great to see so many of us fashion textile educators chiming together with the changes that we need to make in not just the industry, but also how we are teaching the design of fashion and textiles. And that's really what our presentation focuses on today. So we were working alongside other staff, technical staff, as well as students on this research project on BA Honors Fashion and Textile Design at the University of Portsmouth. Our study seeks to identify the situated knowledges of staff and students as we learn to teach design-led upcycling. Susan, who leads on the student participation and learning, is going to give further detail on the nature of the project. And Lara, who worked closely with students and technicians, will identify the occurrences of situated knowledge in the processes of design-led upcycling. And I'm going to follow this then with a brief explanation of the theoretical and analytical grounding of the project as it continues. So over to Susan.
Hello everybody. As a team, we've been making a conscious shift towards an entirely sustainable curriculum. So when this collaboration was proposed, it was important to us that the project was fully embedded in our teaching and not as an additional voluntary opportunity. We decided to place it within the enterprise elements of the course, as we believe it is vital for the students' understanding of sustainable design to know where their designs fit within an economic context and market segment. Looking at demographics by ideology help them to understand that they are not designing for mass consumption, but will be reaching their customers through shared ethics and principles. Introducing the commercial considerations first helped them to understand why they are doing it. It gave them a framework of understanding to know we're not just making more stuff for stuff's sake, sustainable or otherwise, but because there is a market that wants to buy it, wear it, invest in it, and for them to see how economic sustainability is intrinsically linked to environmental and ethical sustainability. The work they produce demonstrates how an understanding of the commercial context for fashion and textile production is an integral part of the design process. The students worked in small groups and were giving a limited number of worn or obsolete military uniform stock, varying in size, fabrication, fibre and colour. For parity, each group was given similar items to share between them, such as jumpers, shirts and outerwear. As these waste uniforms were limited, they had to be supplemented with additional materials, which instigated discussions about sourcing waste and how to upcycle. These conversations developed into the concept of design-led upcycling, which centred on the key factor, which was that to make it upcycled, it had to have been categorised as useless or waste in the first place. And that's resonated throughout all of the presentations today, which has been great for us to hear. And not just unwanted, otherwise they would be adding energy unnecessarily onto perfectly wearable clothing. A key factor in the successful outcome was the integration of fashion and textile processes together to really establish new functionality, value and desirability. Another maybe unexpected but brilliant outcome of the work was how innovative the practice of limiting choice was. By giving creative students items that they hadn't chosen or selected in any way did not inhibit their creativity, it completely unleashed it. It was innovation through constraint. Thank you.
After unpicking the garment, the students had to negotiate and divide the limited materials, making it necessary for them to reassess the designs in their initial business plans and ensuing discussions about sourcing further ways to supplement it. Students also confronted their attitudes towards these materials, some having to overcome personal feelings of disgust and limitation. The limited materials forced new ways of working at every stage of designing and making, particularly at testing, sampling, and toiling stages. When planning printed textile design, some students found that the best way to test print colorways was to use Adobe Illustrator, working on scans of the textiles to be upcycled, as we see in the image. Students mentioned that their design aesthetics were impacted by the donated materials, forcing redesigns and paneling to make the best use of fabric or to incorporate the utilitarian shapes. As participants' awareness of waste and upcycling methods improved, realizations emerged of how wasteful toiling can be. In the next iteration of this project, we will consider the use of 3D rendering or digital twirling for design-led upcycling. Examples of our initial findings are outlined as follows. Students and staff considered whether a reasonably sound garment should be upcycled or repurposed and worn as is, vocalizing questions around the justification of energy expenditure, time, and resources. Key to decision-making as responsible designers was weighing up the energy taken to discard or dispose of waste clothing in comparison to the energy expended on design-led upcycling. The waste uniform was assessed as compositional elements varying in weight, color, and behavior, with considered raw materials that could be used as new materials after being unpicked, and cooked materials that have been heavily processed as cuffs, for example, or areas with pockets for potential redeployment as useful hooks from which to develop new designs. The requirements of clothing in a military context include internal protocols, for example, health and safety, which may mean that items are more readily discarded whether worn or not. Through design-led upcycling methods, these items are shifted into a commercial and therefore more social and personal context with requirements focused on individual or group-based needs, desires, and circumstances. And you can see here one of the examples of our students' work where some of the elements that were incorporated in the design have been directly upcycled from the utilitarian pocket, for example. So we saw that element in the first image of the raw materials, and then the way it's been introduced into as part of the design itself. Okay, I pass on to Elaine.
Thanks, Lara. So after working with our students, we wanted to start to analyse the learning. So our analysis is led by the notion of commoning from Dewey's theory of communication, which draws on the etymological linkages between the terms common, community, and communication. All the participants, academic staff, technical staff, students, and those individuals and organisations donating the waste uniform to us possess and offer situated knowledges. We seek to recognise all approaches and perceptions of the knowledge-making process of design-led upcycling in fashion and textiles. In our methods, we attend to the relations at play between participants and participants in the material objects themselves, open to unexpected and surprising co-learning opportunities, which we just don't have enough time to really go into today, but look out for our paper. As we've heard, design-led upcycling encourages deeper criticality and reflexivity for staff and students as designers, learners, and educators. We all interrogated the facets of our situated knowledges as designer citizens and citizen consumers. Our methods showed that the design-led upcycling encouraged participants to draw on their personal histories of consumption and behaviours as citizens, and triangulated this with our roles in the academic design environment. For our staff, we look ahead to the challenges of teaching upcycling methods in the post-pandemic era, with the next cohort of students doing this project. We refer to the concept of fashion commons as described by Twigger Holroyd. To common is to belong to all, to be used by all, and to be shared. In a time when the sharing of material objects is disavowed, sharing and belonging in knowledge and connection making and learning is most important. Twigger Holroyd imagines fashion as an open access common land, accessed differently by different people at different times, and with no areas enclosed or inaccessible. Those participating in commoning fashion co-construct explicitly and implicitly their interrelated situated knowledges. Through recognising, communicating and capturing varied knowledges of design and experiences of design-led upcycling, so through doing interviews, photographing the process and the resultant work and the designed artefacts themselves, we are seeding or imprinting on the fashion commons so that that landscape is forever impacted. So this study is going to continue with a new cohort next year and different waste materials, as well as this kind of blended online, offline learning and teaching environment that we're all in at the moment. In the hope that we'll be using different kinds of ways to approach upcycling and growing a resource of design and pedagogic research materials to share in the communities on days such as this. Thanks everyone for listening. Happy to take any questions or contact us by email.
Wonderful. And you finished 3 minutes early. That was great. So we have plenty of time for comments, quick reactions, yeah, questions. Yeah, please. Yeah, Anika says, lovely presentation. Jane says, brilliant. Kendra says, oh, the resultant designs were impacted by the aesthetics of given materials. Okay, I think there is a question. Did that help students who are often still stumbling around trying to find their own aesthetic? And overall, how are the aesthetic outcomes viewed by others? So,
do you want to answer that one, Sue? Because it came up in your part.
Yes, they were impacted by the visual qualities of the fabrics themselves, but in a way that I was worried. I come from a fine art background myself, and the idea of limiting choice seemed quite anachronous to me, but it was amazing how it had the complete opposite of going with something so limited. They responded really beautifully to it and didn't feel constricted, but were led into it in a really unexpected way for me. So it helped them find their own aesthetic, but it helped me learn as an educator as well. So that was a really fantastic outcome. The way they responded to the given aesthetics was very positive.
I think you'll see in some of the images, because our course teaches fashion and textile design, that some of them who really didn't want any of the kind of camouflage or typically military textile patterning literally obliterated that patterning by applying their own textile designs on top. So, you know, actually it becomes a very richly layered, intricate, you know, surface pattern because of the layering of their own aesthetic on top of the existing aesthetic, which I think worked exceptionally well. And I think what Lara mentioned about this kind of notion of disgust actually is something that we don't really talk about. You know, we're all here very much kind of pro exploring upcycling as a method for design, but really kind of for some students, the notion of handling secondhand materials is actually a bit repulsive. So trying to get around that is an interesting one that we have to consider. You know, and as we're saying, trying to remember that students bringing their own knowledge and experience to this, that we have to recognise and respond to in our teaching methods.
Wonderful. There are some more comments that they like the idea of limiting the choice, which pushes creativity. And I think there are a few questions. Maybe you can look into that, maybe have a nice chatting session with some of the participants who have asked. So before moving to the next presentation, I just personally would like to say that I love these 3 C's that were commoning, community, and connection. I think they're so relevant and so crucial for social sustainability of the concept of current, how fashion industry works and how actually many of the consumption or production systems work. So it's wonderful. I can clearly see so many connections that are just there for advancing social sustainability. And finally, I would totally buy that jacket on slide number 3. Okay, so I would like to welcome our next presenters, Chanjuan and Kendra, Upcycling Advocate. So welcome.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Oops. Can everybody see the screen?
Yes. Yes, perfect.
All right, great. Oops. Let me go back. All right, so my name is Chanjuan and assistant professor from University of North Texas in the Department of Design.
And I'm Kendra Lapolla, associate professor at Kent State University in the United States.
And our presentation is, Upcycling Advocate, fostering engagement and empowerment through the Upcycle Guidebook in undergraduate courses. So give a little background. As many researchers today have stated, fast and mass fashion has created an overwhelming amount of consumption and waste in our world today. So as the study of recycling and upcycling grows, fashion students need to be prepared with more knowledge of sustainable principles as they relate it to design and the manufacturing process. So upcycling is a sustainable process that a student can apply to the industry and also use to engage consumers in a more sustainable product life cycle. We think that beyond the facilitator, the designer's role can expand even further, such as inspiring advocate, empowering the younger generation consumers, with a little bit more appropriate toolkit to shift to a more sustainable economies. So we have already seen a lot of similar business construction structures, where the designer is not just doing the recycling and upcycling, but also encourage and empowering the customer to do something similar, with a set of concepts and tools.
So moving on to our research question, what we were really looking at for this was how we could have our own students inspire, our upper level students inspire our underclassmen. And so what we were looking at is how we could create this research study where the upperclassmen could create a guidebook to share with the underclassmen, almost to create an upcycling of their own internal education system. So that's sort of what I was stating there at the end. The question was how to inspire younger generations with an entry-level sewing skills to upcycle clothing. So go ahead.
Sorry, it's a little slow here, so I couldn't really hear from that, but I'll try to catch up. So the project that we did is from this course called the Sustainable Studio Applications, which is an advanced design course. So the students were required to so there's a mix of senior and the graduate student. So they have to do research, literature review, and then creating a sample garment before they start actually developing the draft of this book. Is called Upcycle Guidebook. So that book is basically a book based on a capsule collection of 5 upcycled garments that the upcycling, the student designed and constructed. So then we kind of introduced a new designer role for the student as upcycling advocate. From this course, where they can not just designing, but also kind of empowering the younger generation. Later we will introduce a little bit more. But a little bit different about this book is we ask the student to use only one type of second-hand garment, which in this case is men's shirt, to upcycle into multiple different looks. they also addressed, sizing information with, and consideration of pockets and interesting constructions. And the instructions are very detailed. Here, just give you an example. One of the design that the student were trying on herself and make sure the fit and the details are good from front and back. And then once they developed the draft of the book, they then moved on to testing the guidebook with a lower level, entry-level undergraduate classes with a mix of fashion design and the merchandising student in order to kind of promote the upcycling and receive their feedback. Students in that course are with very limited sewing skills, and some of them might never even take sewing classes. So those students were asked to complete at least one garment from the guidebook and participate in a quantitative survey to address their experience by following the guidebook, and if they have any feedback to give to the student advocate. And on the right side, you can see the sample page where that was from the draft. So each of the garment has about 4 to 10 pages of the instructions with their images of how to construct the actual garment from the, the men's shirt. And again, they talked about the sizing, so they used mostly large or extra large men's shirt in order to fit several different sizes for the student. Just some pictures to show, while they are working with the undergraduate students. So the student advocate laid the garments on the dress form, like the five designs. Actually, 2 of them are like just upside down to show the different ways to wear them. And then they also provided several donated men's shirt in the plastic bin on the front. The middle and the right side of the picture just shows the undergraduate students are working on designs on their own without any help, but just by reading the guidebook. And then once they finished once the student finished creating their own garment, and then they had the student advocate come up with a survey to give to the students to receive feedback, in responding to if there are any changes they should make to the guidebook. So 2 big things from the survey was about the construction key component and the demos, because most students are very, either never learned about sewing or only know how to, it's very simple, like straight stitch. So they had to come up with demo sections about some very basic construction techniques, such as single folded bias tape or how to make a rolled hem. And they, and they also come up with different sewing kit in different colors and icons.
So these are just a snippet of some of the sample pages that are in the Upcycled Guidebook. As Chanjuan had mentioned, they were doing these for undergraduate students with limited sewing skills. And our thought with that was a way to kind of pull it into underclassmen, but also it could then go out to a larger group of people that would also have limited sewing skills. So you can kind of see how things are laid out, how many shirts it takes to make the design that's shown, and then all their kind of key items that they were talking about in terms of where to pin, how to measure, those types of descriptions. And then these are the 5 looks that the student came up with, a mix of tops, a bottom and some dresses for their capsule collection. And you might have saw the snippet of those in the earlier picture when we were showing the undergraduate students working on the projects. There are a couple of them, like I think the one on the far left can be worn a couple different ways. So we were also trying to get them to think about multi-wear if it was, if it made sense. So the one on the left, I think, can also be worn as a skirt.
So as you can see, the designs are very simple, but one thing we're really trying to promote is to create something that's wearable, that they can actually thinking about sale in the store. you know, to a local community. So then once we finished the study, the project, we have given a survey to the student advocate to kind of give feedback to us about the whole project overall. So you can see, you know, the one student advocate said the project really helped me to improve not only my upcycling skills, but also my problem solving skills. Additionally, the student advocates articulated the final guidebook based on analysis and evaluation to provide integrated guide for a younger generation of customer. In this case, is the entry-level, you know, undergraduate student to kind of experiment with their upcycle designs. And then lastly, the student advocates appreciated the value of the project outcomes, and then the temporary title of upcycling advocates, which kind of advanced their leadership skills by, you know, some of the comments that you can see. So for the undergraduate classroom participants, this is the survey that they gave right after they finished their, you know, their own upcycle garments in the classroom. So there are 22 participants from that underclassmen, and then, you know, all responded positively to the guidebook, and they really appreciate the idea of upcycling. Out of the 22 participants, 54% of them said that they would actually wear or maybe wear their garments to events such as picnics, vacations, or even going to classes. So finally, we come to our discussion and the conclusion. So as you can see, this Upcycle Guidebook developed a method for garment upcycling that will expand the possibilities for reproduction. And we also tested the effectiveness of the book through working with you know, a group of 22 undergraduate students. And then it also kind of developed the students' collaboration and communication skills through, you know, educating the younger generation of customers to how to upcycle. And then as you can see, the book itself can also serve as a basic outline and template for testing, making, and creating. So with this type of format, we think it can be acted as kind of like a technical package for, you know, for upcycle garment production in the future. Hopefully that can, you know, help the production, help the industry to actually produce upcycle clothing. And then lastly, the creation of Upcycle Guidebook also kind of sets out to kind of share knowledge about upcycling to a younger generation in an accessible way. So this is our reference and the questions.
Just in time. All right, so please welcome with your questions, comments. Yeah. Well, I think it would be amazing if you could just post a link for the digital guidebook that you have created from this work. I think it would be amazing just to that you.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
If we have a minute, I can maybe just put it up on my computer.
Yeah, or you can just you know, put it in the comment section whenever. I mean, if it is accessible for free. Or maybe people would like to buy, or I don't know.
So just kind of, you know, a quick, I guess we can quickly flip through. So like in the beginning, we kind of have a little bit of the why upcycle, kind of educating the consumer a little bit, and then the process of how the student did it. And then, you know, the demos of each of those, you know, simple construction techniques, as I mentioned. Elastic casing. And then it goes to the 5 garments, and they come up with really fun titles, such as Pies Pockets. And then they usually show what look like on the model. And then same thing for the Oxford skirt. You know, usually they will list what are the tools needed, what the size of the garments needed, and then step-by-step instructions. And this is the last garment. It's an actual dress. So they also put it from the level of difficulty. So the first design is the easiest and the last design is like the hardest. So students can pick which level of difficulty they want to try. So as you can see, they have way more pages. So that's the end of the page.
Well, thank you so much for sharing it. It looks so systematic, as somebody has already put in the comments, a very clear and methodological approach for non-experts. And definitely, I would like to, such a handbook or guidebook would inspire someone like me to do something with, with my old clothes. Okay, thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you so much. And so next, we are almost on time, and I never get to use this bell that I have brought from my home. So I would just like to say that we are just in time. We are just 2 minutes over, and we are already into our fifth presentation. We are more than halfway in this session. So I would like to welcome Anika and Daphne.
Great, hi, thank you. Hello, everyone. So my colleague Daphne, she's in Australia. So we pre-recorded our presentation because it's the middle of the night for her. So I'm just gonna go ahead and share my screen and play that.
Oh, perfect.
Hello, my name is Anika Kozlowski, and I am an assistant professor of fashion design, ethics, and sustainability in the Department of Fashion at Ryerson University in Toronto, Canada.
And I'm Daphne Mohajer, and I'm a lecturer in the School of Fashion and Textiles at RMIT University in Melbourne, Australia. Today we'll be giving a short presentation titled Recontextualizing and Appropriating Secondhand Western Fashion Items in Non-Western Contexts. In discussion about our respective research, mine being situated in Japan and Anika's being in Ghana, we were fascinated by the conditions that structure emerging fashion practices in non-Western nations, and noted that they were generated by the global export of Western used garments. So we decided to look at the ways that the movement of secondhand clothing through the value chain creates openings for the emergence of new clothing cultures. In the destination sites of secondhand clothing, the attributes of the garments are altered through material transformation or the shifting of cultural categories, such as symbolism, value, function, or aesthetics.
This is a map of the global secondhand clothing trade. Countries in blue are secondhand clothing exporters, while countries in pink are major importers. Yellow are countries that have secondhand clothing bans in place. We can immediately recognize there is a gross imbalance in the movement of secondhand clothing. Globally, around 25% of garments are collected for reuse or recycling through a variety of systems. The highest, top quality clothes are sent to Japan, while the lowest and largest percentage, 70, ends up in Africa. More than 70% of the world's population uses secondhand clothing, and in 2019, the secondhand clothing trade economy was valued at US $28 billion, a five-fold increase from 2015.
In discussing our research, we found meeting points between these two different cultural contexts, and you can see some of the keywords on the left that came up. American imperialism, power dynamics between cultures meeting, war, and diplomatic or missionary visitation. The post-World War II moment affected both places, and both were subjects of exportation of the American dream or American imperialism in different ways. So I'm going to talk about Japan, and I'd like to note that there are indigenous practices of secondhand trade that have long histories in Japan. For most of its history, Japan was shut off from the West. In the Japanese case, upcycling happens through translation and adaptation, and is an interesting site to ask questions about cultural exchange. Ironically, in the late 19th century, Western clothing began to be adopted in order to avoid colonization. to present especially the higher class members of society as being modern, which in itself is a word tied to colonial ideology. After surrendering to the Allies in World War II, during the time of American occupation and rebuilding of the country, Japan experienced massive social, political, and economic shifts. A large amount of new and second-hand clothing was imported, mostly from the United States, during this period. It was a time of need, as supplies of cotton were insufficient. So the US military also discounted new and second-hand goods. And jeans are actually called G-pants in Japan, which refers to the GIs who used to wear them. That was really the beginning of the denim obsession in Japan. Denim now has a unique space in the Japanese market and fetches a high value for both new and vintage pieces. Tokyo's Okachimachi, Ueno, and Asakusa neighborhoods became the black market hotspots for buying secondhand American, especially military clothing. In addition to military discards, you could buy suits, button-up shirts, and pants, and there were places that would resize garments for the Japanese body. These garments have been adapted, translated, and redesigned, and now have their own market in Japan.
I'm going to speak about Ghana and how the import of Western clothing has always been subject to power dynamics that favor the West and are not necessarily beneficial to African countries such as Ghana. While secondhand clothing represents only a very small proportion of the global clothing trade, it represents more than 30% of imports and over 50% by volume of clothing imports to many sub-Saharan countries. The secondhand clothing trade agreements between the US and Ghana occurred in the late 1950s, early 60s, when Ghana gained independence. The previous colony, Ghanaians already had ascribed a higher level of value and respect for those who wore Western clothing. Ghanaians were well primed as a market to accept secondhand Western clothing. This timing also coincided with the acceleration of malls and the introduction of the credit card in the USA. The US needed an outlet for used clothes to create room for the consumption of new trendy clothing, not unlike how the plastics industry has set up an export system for plastic waste and recycling, the facade of a sustainable solution for greater consumption. Today, 40% of secondhand clothes are sent to landfill within the first week of arriving in Ghana. That's roughly 6 million pieces, and there are many reasons for this. We send our worst clothing to Africa, thinking someone needs it. This is a deficit myth and is untrue. Clothing is originally designed and made for Western bodies, styles, and tastes, such as using lots of muted tones, blacks and grays, or oversized styles, while Ghanaians prefer color, print, and more fitted styles. Importers have very little choice or influence over what they buy. Bales are bought blind. Other than a descriptor like women's blouses, one has no idea what is in the bale. It is a big gamble at an average cost of $250 US for a bale. If 40% of clothing coming into Ghana are waste, we must consider if this is a new frontier of waste colonization. The very name given to secondhand clothing when they first arrived was dead white man's clothes, because Ghanaians couldn't believe someone alive would have this many clothes to give away. Abundance and excess were not concepts well understood by Ghanaians. Today they know it is excess and comment to the increase in secondhand clothing being imported and their decline in quality. To perpetuate the deficit myth, the West is sold the narrative that the donations are charity, when in fact the majority are sold for profit by exporters. Kantamanto Market spreads 7 acres across the center of Accra. There are only 30,000 traders and retailers who mount stands in the markets every day and have contributed immensely to the informal grassroots economy of the country. Kantamanto is not just a market, it is a community and the largest secondhand market in Ghana and West Africa. Retailers frequently choose to sell one particular type of clothing and build up a clientele. It is no longer a job they wish for their children to take over.
Until the 1970s, secondhand clothing was largely consumed in response to need, and existing styles were replicated for the Japanese market. Around the 70s, imports of different kinds of higher quality and diverse clothing increased, and it became fashionable to wear secondhand clothing. Consumers were able to locate and purchase items that they never would have been able to find new at the time domestically, and they appropriated and translated them locally. This is Goro's, a cult-followed shop that opened in 1972 that specializes in handmade, Native American-inspired jewelry. It has such a cult following that the lineups go around the block. By 1980, in Harajuku and Shibuya, some secondhand clothing shops opened, and the Yoyogi flea market began on the former site of U.S. military residences in Yoyogi Park. It still continues today. After this, Japan entered a time of great economic prosperity called the Bubble Era. This time was characterized by very large imports of European luxury brands, as well as the vintage boom. The vicissitudes on value placed on fashion products became apparent in this period. Vintage, secondhand, need-based purchasing, antique, and fashion all became mixed up and recontextualized. A 150-year-old pair of denim jeans was sold for 2 million yen, which is around $20,000 US. And huge amounts of American dead stock, which would also fetch high prices, and especially denim, was brought over. And the providence and sense of use in something increased its value. Context became currency, and this could be when secondhand changed to the term vintage, which has different connotations. This is Pinnap, a shop in Tokyo's Uraharajuku neighborhood. Pinnap specializes in clothing from the 1990s onwards, especially what they call old school style, and they do a lot of editing of the pieces themselves and upcycling them and remaking them. They also innovate in this area. After this vintage boom, vintage clothing entered into the collective consciousness and became more accepted. Even clothing manufacturers who naturally only made new items then began applying vintage finishes to create lookalikes and, in a sense, fake vintage garments. As Japan entered the 90s and the coming economic boom, popular smaller shops became big businesses, moved to mass manufacturing, and opened large-scale shops. The real thing, however, still fetches a premium. This is Jantique, a shop in Nakameguro. It has an incredible selection of 19th century American clothing and items. And it has such a good selection that I once was asked by a designer from Ralph Lauren, an American brand, to accompany him there to help him do research on American heritage clothing.
When secondhand clothing first entered Ghana, it was not in the volumes we see today. It was far better quality and fulfilled a small need. Perhaps a businessman who needed a dress shirt or someone wanting a pair of jeans. And prior to neoliberal economics and globalization, Ghanaians could afford to buy locally made clothing and support local craft industries. However, starting with the 70s, there was a sharp decline in local manufacturing of textiles and clothing. Coupled with other global and local trade agreements and socioeconomic policies, Ghanaians could no longer support locally made as they once did and became more reliant on secondhand clothing. The oversupply of secondhand clothing brings down prices and leads to massive waste. Today, many tailors occupy a section of Continental Market where they perform repairs and alterations, giving new life to cast-offs through a waste valorization process. They are the last line of defense against this waste. Secondhand clothing undermines the value of tailor-made clothing, which has a long, rich history in Ghana. Oversupply cheapens clothing and encourages fast fashion behaviors. The speed at which fast fashion is produced is almost the same for secondhand clothing imports. Twice a week, there are secondhand clothing imports totaling to 15 million items of clothing entering Continental Market in a country of 30 million people. Ghanaians have now adopted fast fashion buying behaviors without the presence of fast fashion retailers such as H&M, Zara, Boohoo, or Primark, which do not exist in Ghana. Due to the low quality of clothing sent to Ghana and local cultural contexts, there are many upcycling practices that take place, such as denim repair, or re-dyeing denim, a waste valorization process. Many embellishments and Frankensteining of common items such as Birkenstocks or Converse are frequent. The excess is too great in Continental, and by the end of day, clothes litter the floor. Waste management is expensive, and the only formal landfill, Capone, is currently closed. The landfill caught fire due to too much clothing waste. Clothing is informally dumped, slowly making its way to sea. Our remnants, twisted like seaweed, they mark a new geographic landscape of excess. This presentation isn't a finalized theory on the connections between Ghana and Japan. Rather, we used our research on these disparate sites to discuss the topic of upcycling, cultural exchange, and the movement of secondhand clothing, and found that there were places where they touched, overlapped, and connected to the same systems of global material and cultural movement, and has provided valuable insights into the nuances, practices, and conditions of burgeoning local upcycling systems.
Wow.
So weird to watch a presentation while I felt very meta.
Actually, personally, I mean, first of all, congratulations. Thank you so much for such a wonderful and meaningful task that you're doing. And second, I think I would have recorded my presentation. I think it sounds so good. It's smooth and really good job there as well. And third is, I think your presentation personally have moved something in me, but it has again kind of busted this myth of secondhand, especially when it is exported to other countries. So for me, yeah, it has done it again. It's so kind of harming for their local industry and craftsmanship and culture and how they used to wear clothes and which kind of clothes they used to wear. It has just kind of made alive so many things in me. So I would like to welcome some questions, comments here. So Neil Maycroft says, really good, very analytical and informative. And Sam says, this was so interesting. And Noorin says, wow, this is so powerful and really highlights the potential of upcycling to help with these waste streams. Elaine has also sent a comment here. This is so interesting. Thank you so much for sharing your important research. Waste valorization, fast second-hand import systems, extraordinary imagery. Where is this published? Please.
We haven't published this yet because we just sort of came across this interstices between our work recently, but I have been working, at least for the Ghanaian side, I was working with an NGO called the Auras Present. So I would strongly recommend, I'll type it in the chat, looking at them because they're the ones who did the specific work on Cantamanto. And then I was there surveying all the waste on the beach. So that's why I have all this ridiculous and you know, not to bring a somber mood, but it was the most mind-blowing thing in the world to see an ocean full of clothing like that and have it wrap around your feet like seaweed, and just be subject to that excess firsthand. I think if every fashion student saw that waste, they would think twice about how garments are made in the first place, because unfortunately, we don't keep our waste, at least in Canada. Less than 10% of what is donated stays in our country. So it's really kind of questioning too, how do we keep the waste here so that we can deal with it, right? And teach our students to deal with it.
Yeah, so it clearly shows the rebound effects of our Western consumption and how it spills over to other countries. And there is a wonderful comment by Ruth Morrow. She loved the presentation, really good, very original, make a TV program. I found the positioning of Japan and Ghana beside one another very interesting. It felt deliberate. You should really pitch it to media. It should make a fascinating documentary. Yes, I'm also up for that. Yeah. And Tim has also written, what are the prospects for change in each country? How much upcycling takes place as proportion of all imported garments?
Not as much as is needed, because the sheer volume of clothes coming in, right? So 15 million pieces a week are entering just Cantamanto market, not just Ghana alone. And out of those 15 million, 40% is already waste. And that's like their third selection. So there's just immediately waste. They don't even really try to repair it because it's so far gone. So it's kind of this middle pile. So like the first selection is also very small on a bale, and it depends when they're doing the sorting, because there's a whole other sorting process that comes as well. So it's that middle section that they, you know, maybe it just has a stain, or as you saw, the denim being refreshed with new dye. It's just the volume is so great that they can't upcycle fast enough. So they really cater to what the individual clientele. So each retailer has specific clientele depending on what they sell, and they know what sells, and they know their clientele. So they know maybe someone's looking for this or this type of garments, or this type of shape works really well. So when they find those and there needs to be some minor upcycling or repairing or alterations done, those are the garments they choose. And it's because of that close connection and community that they have built that they're able to make those decisions to try and at least recoup. Because as we said, the bales are so expensive that most of the retailers don't make a profit, and the industry is becoming harder and harder for them just because there's so much more bad quality clothing and such a small percentage of good quality, and it never used to be like that.
Once more for that. So thank you so much. It was so moving that, yes, I have lost, now I'm 5 minutes late. It was so important. So it was so important. Yeah. I hope everyone agrees here. So next presentation is by Aziza, Disrupting the Linear Textile Model. at the community scale. So please welcome.
All right. Well, good morning. Here, I'll go ahead and share my screen. All right, can you all see my screen? Wonderful. Well, first of all, good morning. My name is Aziza Cyamani. I am an instructor in the Department of Industrial Design and Interior Architecture at Kansas State University. And today I'm presenting research that I did while I was doing my master's in sustainable environments. And I became really interested in textiles, which was a little different from both the environmental design aspect that I was doing, as well as the industrial design background that I have. But I thought it really fit well, and it was a problem that I was actually noticing in my community of Ames, as well as pretty much in my community of close friends and family. So I'll be talking about a project that aims to disrupt the linear textile model at the community scale. And I'm presenting posters, so I'll go through them and we'll try to hone in on specific aspects. Okay, so a little bit of background. I want to talk a little bit about the sheer amount of textiles that just exists within our communities. In 2017, the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States quotes that they received about 11.2 million tons of textiles aimed for landfills, and that was just in 2017. And of all those textiles that were produced during that year, they mentioned that 15% were able to be recycled. So they were able to be fueled back into the industry, into the market, and sold as secondhand clothing. However, of the 15% that were able to be recycled, only 10% are actually sold in consignment stores, meaning that there is about 90% or 15% of all the textiles that were produced within 2017 that ended up going into the global secondhand trade. So this is a trade that sells secondhand clothing to some of the developing countries, including countries in Asia, in South America, and also in Africa. The previous speaker was talking about clothing that ended up in Ghana, and I'm very familiar with that because my background, actually, I hail from Rwanda in East Africa, where I grew up wearing secondhand clothing. And I thought that was very normal, but a part of me always wondered, where was this clothing coming from? So having moved to the United States to go to school, I thought it would be perfect for me to research where all that clothing was coming from. So this curiosity led me to actually want to really understand what was happening within the global secondhand trade. And looking into it, we start to see multiple players. We find players who are in the collection business, in the sorting business, in the consignment business, and also the secondhand trade business. And then also I want to talk a little bit about the implications of the secondhand clothing, especially when it comes to developing countries such as Rwanda, where I come from. So in 2016, Rwanda and other East African countries wanted to stop the trade of secondhand clothing, and in order for them to develop their own clothing industries. Unfortunately, countries such as the United States reacted quite negatively because they claimed that it would actually affect almost 40,000 jobs in the United States. So during this research, I was able to reach out to multiple stakeholders and players within this industry. And I realized that a lot of the clothing that was actually coming from consignment stores was ending up as secondhand clothing. So everything that isn't sold through the stores is sorted, packaged, and then sent to different countries, sold as secondhand clothing. So when we look at the implications of, or the factors of countries wanting to, developing countries wanting to develop their own clothing industries, and also other countries such as the United States reacting negatively towards those needs, we start to actually find a problem that doesn't have a solution. A lot of clothing is ending up in landfills. The clothing that is being sold as secondhand clothing is almost at a point where they might not have a place to send it. So what's going to happen? And that also led me to look into what was causing the problem of, the sheer amount of textiles that was ending up on the industry. And a part of that is the fast fashion industry, where we're able, even myself, we're able to buy clothing that is actually quite cheap, but also doesn't last very long, unfortunately. So you find that most of that clothing is ending up at landfills. And even when it's being sold as secondhand clothing, you realize that this is clothing that is not able to be put back on the market, neither in the countries where the clothing originates from, nor in the countries where the clothing is ending up in, because of the quality of the clothing, of the low quality of the clothing. So we're kind of stuck in a place where there really isn't a solution, that there is this, the quantity of clothing, reception is starting to dwindle because other developing countries are wanting to develop their own clothing industries. And then we have clothing that's kind of stuck in the middle, and also jobs and an industry that could potentially die and affect a lot of people. So it led me to analyze the linear textile model of what currently exists, which means you buy clothing, you wear it, and then you discard it. So I wanted to find out, are there places where we could apply interventions, or where we could find opportunities to intervene so that we can find a way to either reduce the amount of textiles, or at least find a way to fuel back the textiles that were originating in the United States, where they can stay in the communities where they're being originated or sold. So the goal of this research was to examine the model, focused on disrupting that linear textile model, the buy, use, discard model, and also frame schemes aimed at decreasing the stream of exported clothing to developing countries. So in my research, I applied two research methodologies. One was to create an analysis of the existing models, including all the interventions that currently exist. So in this case, we start to talk about slow fashion, we talk about ethical fashion, we talk about local production, we talk about donation, we also talk about organic materials, and also recycling of textiles. However, to gain insight into the community where my research was being conducted, I was able to administer a questionnaire that aimed to examine the understanding of cloth mending and recycling and upcycling in the community, as well as explore interventions that could potentially be embedded in a small town community, as well as look at the systems that could support and encourage engagement in clothing, upcycling, and recycling. So the research question revolves around how could we adapt systems that encourage and support engagement in clothing, recycling, and how could that be adapted at the community level. So in my research, I was able to interview, gained insight from about 72 respondents who mentioned that most of them, my research questions were focused around 3 topics: mending, disposal, and their perception of secondhand clothing or buying secondhand clothing. So in the disposal phase, most of my respondents mentioned that they were discarding clothing at least once a year. And when I asked them why they were discarding clothing, most of them say that it was because it did not fit anymore, or they simply no longer needed the clothing that they were discarding. And then when I asked them how they were disposing of the clothing, they mentioned that most of them were donating to charities, or sometimes they would dispose it in the trash. And then when it came to secondhand clothing, I asked them what factors were important for them in terms of when they were buying secondhand clothing. And most of them mentioned that cleanliness and style and uniqueness of the clothing were some of the most important, and the price were some of the most important aspects for buying secondhand clothing. And then when asked how likely they were, it seemed like that most of the respondents were quite positive in the likelihood of buying secondhand clothing, as well as when asked where they were buying secondhand clothing, most of them say that they were buying them from consignment stores as well as from thrift stores. So I also asked them their perception towards mending, and most of them say that they thought it was moderately important for them to be able to mend clothing. However, you could tell that through the responses, you could tell that there was a little bit of hesitation when it came to whether they were willing to learn mending or whether they thought it was important. However, when asked for the biggest challenges or the barriers to mending clothing, most of them say that they lacked mending skills, they lacked equipment, and they lacked time to be able to do that. So here I have a few quotes from the respondents. So in the end, through the analysis of all this information and data, I realized that it was important for us to think about a systematic approach when it came to mending and to upcycling textiles, and to keeping textiles within the community. We needed to have sort of a systematic approach to look at the community and their needs, to look at what are the innovation opportunities that exist at the community level, but also to look at mending and reuse, both in terms of equipment, resources, as well as the skill sets. So in the end, I was able to propose sort of a systematic approach towards mending that included creating sort of a resource center in the community called Makerspace, the revamped Makerspace. This Makerspace would have about 3 different services, including a mending workshop, a research center, as well as a resale store. So the idea is that clothing can be donated to the resource center within the community. Volunteers are able to sort through the clothing. Clothing that is of good quality is able to be resold at the makerspace. And then clothing that needs alterations or refitting or changing of the quality or revamping of the quality is actually used at the makerspace to be able to mend. So there are mending technicians, they are artisans within the community who are able to come in and mend the clothing. But also an important factor about that is that the community members are also able to come into the resource center and use the resource center both to learn skills in terms of mending and alterations and sewing skills, as well as conduct research on textile topics and interests. So I was able to actually identify a space within the community. And when I talk about the community, I'm talking about a community in Ames, Iowa. the community is made up of college students, community members, and community members. So we thought it would be a really interesting system to bring together all the community members and have them work together to be able to create this sort of resource center or a makerspace. Yes. So hopefully we haven't really gotten this to start. The program hasn't started yet, but we identify that the biggest challenges could come from lack of funding and really getting community members to adapt to this makerspace and to make it their own. But we believe that with the makeup of the community, both being college students and community members, there is a real opportunity here to create something such as this and to disrupt the linear textile model. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aziza. It was a lovely presentation. I was daring to like do this just because of the time. Otherwise, yeah, I was like, okay, I can listen to this. You know, this is so relevant. So yeah, so we have some reactions in the chat box. Very impressive. It can be so hard to get community academic collaboration project off the ground, Elaine says. And Jane says that great project and is their local excitement about upcycling and repair, etc. So, well, you can interact with them in the chat box. So we are now 7 minutes delayed in a way. And that time probably will come from the tea break that is waiting for us. So we have the last presentation of this session, Future Pathways of Upcycled Textiles by Donna. So welcome, Donna.
Can you see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you. So I just put in the chat, since I am last and I know everyone's tired and they may not want to put information in the chat, I do have a Google link, Google form there if you would like to add some additional comments and put your contact optional for more information. So thank you, everyone. It's been an honor to be here, and thank you for inviting me to speak here. So my name's Donna Maione. I'm a second-year PhD student at the School of Design at CMU, and I'm in Pittsburgh at the moment. So I've been up since 3:30 this morning. I'm formerly from New York City, where I had a long career in fashion design and as a sustainability consultant. So I'm interested in local economies, upcycle textiles, making do, refashion, and circular economy. So my research explores economies on a local level, focusing on waste reduction in textiles, drawing connections through everyday life and local upcycling practices. My goal is to better understand the perceptions of waste and motivation for upcycling within diverse communities and with relationships to scalar models from local to niche and meta level. And I hope the benefits of my research will inform designers new pathways for slower production turnover through circular models. I'm in the conceptual stage of my research, therefore I definitely have more questions than conclusions, and I do welcome all comments and suggestions to further this investigation. As mentioned before, here's a graph from the Environmental Protection Agency, still up on the site. Government hasn't taken this down. Over 11 million tons of textiles go to landfill each year. It's about 8% of the total landfill. I also care about this because a long-standing career in fashion, I realize how much of my efforts and my work that I thought was important is in landfill at this moment. And why I've sort of pivoted, or not pivoted, but I'm working on this pilot study that I'm just beginning. Because of COVID-19, it brought about a reduction in consumer spending. There's been massive cancellations of production orders, layoffs. It sent a ripple effect throughout the globe. And also this pandemic does present a call for change in our social norms and practices. So we all engage differently now. We get dressed differently. We make choices on our purchases, or they've all drastically changed. I also believe that people have more time to reflect if their basic needs are met, and to reassess their priorities. However, as I looked at my research, and due to the pandemic, I thought I need to start to look at how I can do some of this remotely, as we have the disruption of the supply chain, and people are sheltering in place. Local maker communities have come together to make do, and place-based or virtual maker groups are collectively bartering resources, reusing old materials, and continue their craft in niche circles. Some upcyclers make masks for essential workers, other recycle old clothing into new usable items. As in the past, during times of scarcity, these practices of making do emerge within local self-organized structures. With the inclusion of the platform economy, upcycling spans multiple generations, from millennials to boomers. On initial search of Facebook groups using the criteria of upcycled clothing, the top group has 86,000 members and 2.6 thousand daily posts. 3 other groups, all above 50,000 members, ranged from 50 to 100 posts daily. The image on the left, you can see a trending contributor on Facebook upcycling her grandmother's caftan into a contemporary outfit. So beyond the talents of their craft, I believe these makers possess in-depth knowledge of local networks and resourcefulness of materials, which are undervalued when looking at the broader context of circular economies. At present, the focus on global economies ignores these local systems at play. There's a wide range of small and local channels of distribution of reusable textiles, and with face-to-face swap meets stalled, Facebook groups, Instagram, and TikTok allow for material flows and inspiration for upcycled garments. I think there's a unique opportunity to explore these varied approaches to material collection, distribution, and reuse in self-organized fashion in this on these online communities. On the left, you can see an example of what Tim referred to earlier as the exploiter in his talk, where people are adding fashion details, and this is a Nike sports top with some hand crochet to it. And on the right, you can see on TikTok, upcyclers showing off their refashioned items. Just briefly, some of my inspiration to better understand the social perspectives and attitudes towards upcycling come from Waste and Want by Susan Strasser. Also studies evaluating place-based relevance to consumers' viewpoints on secondhand clothing by Gregson and crew, and emotionally durable design by Jonathan Chapman, who also is my primary advisor here at Carnegie Mellon. So as mentioned earlier, organizations such as the Ellen MacArthur Foundation have been instrumental in the circular economy by outlining main ideas for keeping materials in circulation and reducing landfill. This movement, along with popularity and acceptance of secondhand clothing, has gained corporate retailers' attention. However, aside from brands such as Patagonia, seen here on the left, with their Worn Wear program, and Eileen Fisher's Renew, which was mentioned earlier on the right, both are eco-driven, mission-driven organizations. Few others embed this model of reverse supply chain into their operations with take-back programs, repair, or refurbishing. With little economic incentive, the majority of business as usual brands don't design for upcycling. While current initiatives on upcycling are promising, there is definitely a lot more research needed to understand the generational attitudes, boomers, Gen Xers, and millennials. They may all be motivated to upcycle for different reasons and be attracted to different used feedstock. So I also want to include in my research my making practice. I used reclaimed materials, mostly textiles, from clothing to make into useful items. And in this, I will be focusing autoethnographically for this portion of my study. And here you can see, this is my first quilt that I made. I made it from one pair of pants and one shirt with some little bits of scraps that I found. So I used the pockets. I think Noorin mentioned deconstructing helps you learn about construction. So I had made a lot of garments and I thought it was time to disassemble one to see what was there. And men's pants are quite detailed. It's my son's shirt that he bought at a secondhand shop. He wore out the sleeves quite quickly as a rock climber, and I had done some boro mending, and he treasures this and keeps bringing it back for more patches. So this brings me a lot of pleasure that he likes to wear this as well. Just quickly, some of the methods I plan to include in my frameworks. Transitional design, which is the degree that I'm working on at Carnegie Mellon, and multi-level perspective, which is Jill's framework. And this is just an example of the multi-level perspective. This is something I did for the waste system in Pittsburgh, where it looks at historic multi-level niche to regime and landscape. So given that we are in a huge landscape shift with COVID-19, I do believe this is the opportunity for some of this to bubble up. Again, you can put comments in the chat or use that form. And since this is my early formation of my research, I do welcome all feedback. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Was the last presentation, but you finished in time. Thank you.
I had a feel.
We're only 3 minutes over. Yeah, we are only 3 minutes over. Let's say maybe we will give maybe a couple of minutes for reflections, for comments. I can read in the chat box that somebody was it Jane. She loves your slow stitch on your son's sleeve. And actually linked to that, I got an idea because the trouser I'm wearing is quite old and from the pocket is just falling apart. And I got the idea just to wrapping a cloth around and keep on using it. Thank you so much.